It takes a lot of ingredients to fix or build a car, like cooking, but without the frozen dinner easy way out. eBay Motors has 122 million parts. It's always the right fitment, so you can follow any recipe to a T. Whether it's a vintage Italian coupe that's classic like Grandma's meatballs or a German luxury car that's as complicated as Oma's rouladen, to cook up something great in the garage, use the eBay Motors app or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.
Holidays are here, and so is fashionable fitness. Gift yourself a Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3 5G, a phone that folds in half to literally stand on its own. Pair it with the Galaxy Watch 4 for ultimate wellness and wow factor. Check health stats, flex personal records. Over 90 activities can be tracked, like biking, swimming, golfing, and more. Invest in yourself with tech made to crush goals. Holidays open up with Galaxy. Shop it all at Samsung.com. 5G connection and availability may vary. Check with carrier. Products sold separately.
Hey everyone, this is the Almost World Podcast. Bringing to you mind-blowing interviews with guests from all over the world. So settle down, relax, and enjoy the show. Oh yeah, by the way, if you like the podcast, please support Elmo's World Podcast on Patreon. Your support is what helps the podcast improve more and more. Your host, now I'm with my friend Tasneef Mahammad. Bro, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Tasneef Mahammad, as you said. I suppose a name is the label for the person. Beyond that, I'm 29 years old. I kind of dabble in similar sort of intellectual pursuits to yourself. That's it really. I mean, I've got a bachelor's in sociology, and I've recently started psychology as a master's, which means, of course, by no means I'm an expert, but that gives me a window into questions about epistemology and ontology and things like that. So that's why I take interest.
Okay, awesome. Well, I want to dive into what you currently believe, right? So you're living life, and to you, what is the best way to live it? That's the most basic question, I think.
hmm I think to decide what the best way to live your life is, you first have to define best.
Yeah, we should.
So, yes, right. So I think the first thing that one should do is be able to find a consistent moral code. And as far as I understand it, all secular moral codes that don't ascribe themselves to a foundation of reality, for example, God, who is the founder of our reality and all reality, I think those kind of value systems are arbitrary. So the first thing to do to live or to live your life the best way you can is define best and define good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So before the discussion of ethics and what's good and what's not, we have to first discuss what is.
I guess when you say that you have to tackle the subject or the topic of whether God is or not is, and then you could start establishing what your value system is based on, right? So when
Right, and it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be God. Sorry to cut you off. It doesn't have to be God. Just the question of what is. Why? What is this? After you discuss what this, you sort of come to a conclusion as to what your reality is. Then you can discuss what the best way to go about it is, right? So if I give you an example, if you are presented with an object, in order for you to know what to do with it, you must know what it is. So if you know that the object is food, then you know you can eat it. If you know that the object is poisonous, then you know you can't eat it. So in order for us to act, we must first perceive and form an opinion or a perception about the thing, about the reality, and then we can act in our reality.
Well, I beg to differ though, right? Like people can live their lives with ignorance. Ignorance is bliss. Like I don't need to know everything about the universe in order for me to live what I think could be a good life. And to me, like I would be satisfied if I just live it according to what it appears to me. And if this is what I think
Mhm.
is good, whether or not it subscribes to or is exactly what is prescribed in reality, it to me it
Mhm.
would seem inconsequential. That's what
Okay.
a lot of people would view it as.
Sure. Um, so people who would deem that as inconsequential are maybe people who sort of dabble with postmodernism or dabble with more moral relativism, that nothing's really moral. You kind of just pick what you like and do your best. I mean, fair enough if you want to live that way. You might sit in yourself know that you would struggle to validate those morals that you follow um, consistently. And the second thing is that if you have if you here's the problem with this now. If you say that you have a morality that does not need to be justified, if something contradicts your morality, then you would need to be able to justify contradicting that person. So, for example, if according to your moral code, Adolf Hitler was wrong for the Holocaust and killing millions of people, if you think that's wrong and that's against your moral code, then you might need to have a consistent basis to go against Hitler's moral code, because otherwise it's just your opinion versus Hitler's opinion, and therefore Hitler's moral code is just as much as valid as yours. So that's why justification of the moral code is important.
Well, to me, I think that justification would seem irrelevant because what it actually is that in our world today, it's simply that might is right. Whoever is in power, whoever has the stronger army, stronger state, that they are the ones who dictate what is right and wrong. That's why we have wars, and wars ultimately
That's right, yeah.
determine who is right or wrong. So so what happens here is that justification is merely subjective. Hitler could feel justified with himself. Any person, any criminal would
Sure.
justify his actions. So it would seem that
Yeah.
justification, especially if you can't falsify it, nobody could convince themselves otherwise that they feel that they're right in this. So there is no universal way to justify any moral code right now, as of right now, I think. Well, not
Well,
absolutely, of course.
well, this is what I'm saying. So if you do take the stance that justification is not required, then you're absolutely right. Then the consequence can be to accept that might is right, that it's all relative, and whoever's in power can decide what's right, and whoever's in power can decide what's wrong. And then someone might be just a criminal might be justified in their own actions, and it's just as valid as your own justifications. And I think that's okay. If you want to believe that, that's fine. But I think it dilutes your own conviction, does it not? If you say, well, I think these actions such as murder and rape are abhorrent actions, but the rapist and the murderer is just as justified in their beliefs as I am. So, then you've diluted your own conviction there.
Well, Well, granted that, okay, you say, you claim to offer a justified moral code, right, based on God or your belief system or your religion. But the thing is, though, when anybody analyzes it, there are a lot of things that people would find inconsistent. In a Christian worldview, any secular worldview, Muslim worldview, people will always find things that they would disagree with, and so it appears to me that no one in this world can offer any justified moral code. So what? So what? So
Well,
what's
the
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 difference?
disagreement itself. Well, the difference is that the disagreement itself is not um, a means. It's not a means of discrediting the moral system. So that's for example, the debate that I like, sorry, the example that I like to use is, for example, the abortion debate. And I'm not going to get into that. I'm just using this as an example to say what happens when you have arbitrary moral
Okay.
codes, and it ends up as an endless debate. So here in the Western world, under liberal democracies, people value freedom, and at the same time, people value human life. So what happens with the abortion debate? One person says pro-life and the other one says pro-choice. But life and choice are both sacred things under the value system of liberal democracies. So it's just like, you saying that you like chocolate ice cream and me saying I like vanilla ice cream. And then I say vanilla and you say chocolate and I say vanilla. There's no formula to end this debate. There's no reference book or text for us to go back to and say, actually, this is what it says and this is what you're supposed to do. So what I'm saying is that I'm not saying people can't have a moral system if they don't have a grounding in reality, or a grounding in their ontology. All I'm saying is that if you do say it's all relative and it doesn't matter, then you have to also accept the logical consequences of it, which you rightly pointed out, that a criminal might also be justified in their behavior, which would go against your morals. And something that's going against your morals, you also have to accept their justification. So there's no point having, or I mean, you might be able to give me a point, but from where I'm sitting, if I'm going to say something's wrong, but then again, my values don't really matter, but according to this person's values, it might not be wrong, then I might as well not say anything is wrong at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess then that, we have to define what morality is. From a
Yes,
religious or theist definition, morality is what God would say is right or wrong. Ultimately, right? It's not something that's transcendent from God Himself, but God is the source. If
that
you
that
in
that's right.
Yeah,
That's right. So
but from a
in terms of,
secular
okay,
person's,
so go on. Mhm.
definition of morality, it's simply some, I guess most of the secular world would define it as simply well-being and concerning suffering. So that's what morality usually covers, so in terms of that, I guess they can make certain objective points as and decisions as to which choice is more moral than the other.
So yeah. So here's an example. Okay, so just to clarify and bookmark our conversation. So if we move on from relativism, moral relativism, and that if you do believe in moral relativism, then you know you can kind of accept anything because everyone has their own justifications, and you may as well not have the morality. Now, if we move on to the conversation of secular ethics, that's a different conversation. Um, People who are secular do have ethical arguments based on principles that they have. How they arrived at those principles is arbitrary, by the way. For example, how did they decide that suffering is a bad thing? Um, and how much suffering is worth it? Because when people go to work, especially people who do hard labor, and they're working all day and their body aches and they're sweating and they're out in the heat, that's technically suffering. They don't like doing that. But at the end of the day, they get paid for it. So they decide that this amount of suffering is worth this amount of money. Now, when people start to disagree that this amount of suffering is worth this amount of money, that's when people start talking about reforms for minimum wage. Let's change the minimum wage now because these people are suffering too much and the money that they're given does not balance out how much they are suffering. Now, there is no, okay, now you can say that people can use this, utilitarianism, least amount of suffering for least amount of people and maximum amount of pleasure for the maximum amount of people. You cannot use this as an objective formula because there is no quantitative measure of pleasure, and there is no quantitative measure of harm or suffering that you can put against a scale. So, for example, if I stub my toe on a piece of Lego, how much pleasure is that worth? Is that worth me receiving £5, or is it me worth receiving £20, or is it worth a chocolate cake? What weighs equally on a scale of suffering versus pleasure to me stubbing my toe on a piece of Lego?
Mhm. Well, you have a point there, but in terms of nitpicking, I don't think that's enough to discount the usefulness of utilitarianist views that approach in terms of how we determine policies and laws and regulations. It's so far it's been very effective. There have been issues, but it it the, these are tools. For us to measure which decisions are good or bad. But in terms of quantification, you can there is in a way some sort of nominal way to measure which decision causes more suffering than the other, right? Like, for example, if you get paid like $100 for an hour compared to for $500 an hour, so
Mhm.
there is some sort of comparative nature where you can
But
derive.
you're quantifying, what you're actually quantifying is the pleasure side of it, or the reward side of it, which is the money. But you can't
Mhm.
quantify the work that goes into it. You can't quantify the suffering side of it.
Well, you can say that, okay, then maybe $100 for 5 hours compared to $100 for 50 hours of work. So that in a way that's sort of nominal measurement as well. But
But that's ascribed nominal measurement. That's a person deciding that $500 should be for 1 hour of this work, and $100 should
yeah,
go to
well,
this
I
1 hour of that
agree.
work,
It is persons,
right? It's
but
ascribed
but
value.
that's what
Yeah,
society is. We are a collective of people deciding for ourselves, and that it includes also includes like economics, where there would be supply and demand and the price and stuff like that. It happens, and people would ultimately, I guess, a compromise in the face of the majority. If like, well, in a secular society like a democracy, for instance, that would be the case.
yeah,
I wouldn't say the same for communist countries, but that's how it works there. But basically, society,
yeah.
how.
No,
Okay, okay.
no. So I understand what you're saying is that people eventually come to a compromise, that, do you know what? I think this amount of suffering worth this amount of reward. But what I'm saying is that there's no universal quantification. There's no standard
Yeah,
measure.
there is no.
Like one
Yeah, there
kilo
isn't.
equals 2.2 imperial
Yeah,
pounds or something.
yeah,
There's no conversion like that. So that's why we can't say that it's objective per se.
yeah. It isn't. It isn't. But we can still work
Okay.
as a society, whether it's not objective though or universal, right? That's how we've been doing it
Hmm.
for thousands of years, and we're still here.
Is it? You would say utilitarianism has been around since before,
No, but what
Jeremy
I mean that
Bentham.
as a society, that even with having subjective values, we can still work things out and end up
Sure. Yeah. No.
negotiating.
Of course you can.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah, no, of course you can. Yeah, of course. No, no, no. Yeah, of course. But the point is not, what I'm saying is that it's not, the point I'm making is not that this can never happen, and, secularism can never work, and arbitrary values can never happen. Of course they can happen. They're happening right now, right? So that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you accept the premise of moral relativism, then you have to also accept that your own convictions will be diluted. If you accept the premise of utilitarianism, then you also have to accept the premise that there is no objective conversion, there is no objective weighing between pleasure and harm.
Mm-hmm.
So if
Mm-hmm.
you do accept these, then you also have to accept this. Now, if you're saying it's subjective, I'm happy with that, no problem. But what I do have an issue with is, I suppose you want to, modern day sort of so-called enlightenment who say, oh, we don't need anything now. We can just figure it all out ourselves. It's all objective. Well, not really. There's no calculator that tells you how much I should be paid in pounds if I stub my toe on a piece of Lego, right? If you have a scale, there's no once, you can't weigh pleasure against pain. Do you understand what I'm saying? And now, if I can add to this, I don't know if I'm gonna. Please do sort of redirect me if I go into a tangent.
Yeah, no worries.
Then on top of this attempt to make a formula by which we can navigate our principles, there are also arbitrary, unbreakable laws. For example, the harm principle, that you can't harm in the process of weighing your benefits and harms, or benefits and whatever you want to call it, suffering. You can't harm anyone. Now, the reason that was put in place is because if you take utilitarianism as a whole on its own, that the maximum amount of pleasure versus the minimum amount of suffering, then you could justify things like gang rape, right? Because 10 people enjoying themselves versus one person in complete misery and pain. Well, maybe that then the 10 people's pleasure outweighs this one person's pain. So that's why, the harm principle, guys, come on now, you can't really go around harming people. Okay, well, if you have to make ad hoc principles to protect this formula that you've made, then I'm sorry, your formula is not untouchable.
Well, I guess then that in terms of like just working with the harm principle, it it wouldn't be as perfect if applied to every aspect of life, right? And including what you just said. But the thing is that
Mm-hmm.
as a society, we have established many laws, like countless laws, and we ground
Mm-hmm.
our societies on values that and freedoms and rights, and all of these we sort
Mm-hmm.
of create a balanced society where we sort of head in a direction towards well, I would say utilitarian, but most would simply say an optimal well-being for everyone, where of course also applies with the most practical economic principles that we should follow, like, well, in some countries it's
But then
more.
you see what happens here. So sorry,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Elmo, you
please go
finish.
on, please go on.
No, thanks. So all I was saying is that you see what happens here. The problem here is that you say, okay, look, we can have utilitarianism, to optimize pleasure, but you have to balance it with, economic practicality. So how do you, again, you have to have a trade-off now. How much practicality versus how much optimal well-being? So, for example, the UK now, I don't know what's the situation in the Philippines with the coronavirus and everything? Are you guys in lockdown or?
Well, we have like social distancing and stuff, masks, but
Okay.
it's all good.
Well. Now, what's happening is that the general opinion in the UK is, people are kind of in flux about, why should we have lockdown, and other people are saying, what about the safety of others? So, for example, Boris Johnson, whichever way he spins it now, people won't be happy because one group of people will say, no, the safety of people should be prioritized over, economic practicality. And at the other end, they'll say people need to go back to work and the economy must continue. So what measures should be taken is something that people disagree on. It's not like society is a hive mind and we completely agree on, what the trade-off should be.
Yeah.
So how much economic practicality? Can we lock down shops? Can we lock down businesses? Do we give them grants? Do we give furlough payment? Because in the beginning, that's what happened. The government, they were, paying people to stay at home and not go to work. And now they want us to go to work, but they just don't want us to go out and socialize and stuff. So you see, the prioritization has changed, but there is no set formula to decide how much risk there should be. how important the public safety is versus how important the economy is. There's no formula to decide that for you. So again, you come to a trade-off.
Well, I guess then that I think what you're saying is that there is a problem with the current methods on how we determine policies in societies, mostly Western societies, right? Like there is a
Yeah,
fluid, and we have ad hoc policies, and there is no
of course.
objective. There are no objective principles and formulas to measure what the exact way.
Well,
But the thing is, though, you can offer an alternative, right? Like, but like what the communists did in having this objective and like authoritarian way, and how to determine who gets this and who gets that, and how the economy is distributed, how resources
mhm.
are used, and regulations and stuff. But the thing is, it doesn't work. You might offer something beautiful, like an ideal principle you have in mind, but the thing is,
What
it
does
won't
it
work.
when you say it doesn't work? What do you mean by work? What does work mean?
Well, in terms of that, I guess that for an individual to live in a society, so that's individual to be happy. We're all in pursuit of happiness. We require at least some freedoms that only Western societies can truly provide, and these freedoms and rights can only be found in, well, in democratic countries. And if you would ask like someone from North Korea, if the- if how, how would how they compare their society to and lifestyle and the freedoms they have, well, but it's a lot worse there, or maybe in communist China.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I agree with you. But if I were the devil's advocate, I would say they would have different measures of a success, of a successful society than you do, and individual freedom would not be one of them. They would say, look how safe we are. There's no crime. Look, look at the job rate. Everyone's got a job. Although it's, they're not really, getting paid from it to the degree that they would in some jobs in here in the West, but that's a different story. So, they would have different measures to measure their success. And, the problem is with this kind of thing, with arbitrary morality, uh, or, subjective morality, or whatever you want to call it, is that anyone can shoot an arrow and draw the bullseye around it and say, this is what we've been going for all along, and this is what things should be. So do you see, do you see why it's kind of like it's an endless thing? Like, you can turn around and say to me, we've got this, and this in the West. Sure, we have. If we talk about specifically, because you've mentioned, I think that yes, we do have these laws based on the principles that they come from, but the laws, they're also under constant review, because the criteria that were used were not consistent ones. You know, in and of itself is not consistent. But at some point, your sanctity of life is going to contradict with your sanctity of freedom, and that's what's happened in the abortion debate. In some point of life, the harm principle is going to contradict with the idea that people should be safe, because what about the criminal that's out there robbing and stealing? Well, the police are going to have to grab him up and cuff him up. So that's going to be a compromise. So how much compromise versus how much you stick to a different principle, that's up in the air. In fact, if I point you to a direction, I'm sure probably better than me about Friedrich Nietzsche's famous saying, "God is dead." You heard that, right?
Yeah.
And then he says what comes to follow is that, and I think it's something along the lines of people's ground from beneath them has been uprooted, because whether or not you believe in Christianity, Europe, when it was basically Christian and not secular, they had an objective, or at least a consistent reference point from which they derived their values. Let's say the church or the Bible, or the Bible through the interpretation of the authority of the church, whatever you want to call it, even though that in itself is a conversation, how much authority should the church have versus the Bible? But let's say it's consistent. So what happened after this is that if your criteria and your reference point is taken away, then the whole thing becomes arbitrary. It becomes like the chocolate ice cream versus vanilla ice cream debate, right? Do you like vanilla ice cream, Eldo? Yeah, Elmo. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So you say vanilla, I say chocolate, and you say vanilla, I say chocolate, and then someone else comes along and says strawberry. And that's what's happening now, because you might say that people are more or less happy with the way things are, but at the other on the other end there are people, third wave, maybe even fourth wave feminists now. There are LGBT activists who are not happy with the way things are. Something that you might think is a comfortable way of sitting on public transport would be considered manspreading and misogyny and sexism by someone else. So you see, it's not as harmonious as you might initially think, because there's constantly some kind of tension and something. If everything was harmonious, then there would be no debates in the parliament, right? What are they talking about?
Mm-hmm.
If everything's harmonious and the principles are consistent, then why are people having a conversation about legislation and about what the government should and shouldn't do?
Mm-hmm.
There should be no need for conversation. It's just a consistent formula that you follow.
Well, the thing though about this is that what you're saying is basically that there are no is not the system, this fluid system is not perfect. There are still issues, and and its inconsistency causes it to be fluid, to keep changing, and whatever you
Yeah.
thought was right before will be wrong maybe next year or the next year, and be right again.
Yeah.
And yeah, but what happens though is that when we I guess that it's all determined by the citizens, the people of the nation. That's why we still have states, we still have countries, because basically people subscribe to their own identity, right? And one of these is that is very important to them is their nationality. And to have a nation, to have a state where a group of people, millions of people, maybe even a billion people, would discuss certain things that rules and policies that would govern others as well, including themselves. They have discussions, I guess the best way that has been done, or methods that this has been done, is through constant discussion, where the policies will always keep changing according to well, if it's a democracy, according to what the majority would determine. But
Fine.
in place, there are also safeguards for those minorities who would feel, well, feel that their rights were not exercised properly, or that they've been oppressed. And I don't agree with the
And who
postmodernists.
who decides their rights?
Yeah, but
Who decides what the rights of the
I was
minorities
getting to
are?
that point though, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to the postmodernists,
Right.
and they do have a point that basically society is just a power struggle.
Hmm.
Whoever dominates, overpowers the other. In
Yeah.
terms of social virtue signaling, whoever feels more right and actually dominates the other party, then you get to determine that's the policy to be made. If pro-abortion laws are win, that's because I overpowered you, I outnumbered you. But
Right.
well,
Yeah.
it's not the best way, but it's
Hmm.
but the thing is though, it's one of it's the that kind of society is the one that actually works best the most, in terms of protecting people's freedoms.
Well, yeah. It's because that's what the basis is, right? But in order to protect the freedom, you must restrict other freedoms. So in order to protect you to go about your business, my freedom to rob you must be restricted.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then, what behaviors should be restricted and what behaviors should be endorsed? How is that decided?
Well,
The harm principle.
I guess it's decided by the in terms of the ideals that a nation holds, right? For example, if you look at America, they you would well, you could see mostly from Trump supporters the ideal America that they see, where everyone's a patriot. There's
Hmm.
everyone has freedom of expression and freedom of
Hmm.
their faith, basically mostly Christianity, but still, in terms of that, they ground their policies on and that because, well, as you would say, it's all they it would appear as if it's subjective, but
Hmm.
that's just the case, and
That's fine. No, that's not an issue. If you say, it's subjective, but that's not an issue. The problem that you have with having inconsistent, with an inconsistent foundation, is that you have to constantly decide what the limits of your beliefs are. And the limits is not something that everybody agrees on. So, there's freedom of expression, and there's also something called hate speech. So, how free should you be to express yourself, and how much of that is considered hate speech? How much hate? So that's, again, it's a line that's drawn that people disagree over. Some people would say, you know, okay, you can't say the N word. That's racist. That's true. I would agree that maybe that's a racist thing to say. But other people would say clapping your hands is a passive aggression to people who are deaf because they can't hear you clapping. You're being passively aggressive to them. Sorry, they call it a microaggression. Excuse me. So I think you and I, on this subject, we kind of agree that it is arbitrary and it is subjective. I think the problem is with these kinds of things is that when there is no objective reference point from which the value should come, from which the beliefs should come from, then it's going to be a constant sort of back and forth, and maybe even sometimes a contradiction. Um, you know, the for example, the point of a free market, the point of it might be that people can, everyone can prosper to the degree of how much they put in. But the side effect of it is monopolization. So monopolization becomes illegal. You can't monopolize, for example, healthcare. Do you see what I'm saying? So that it has to limit itself.
okay, well,
So
I guess then that there are problems in this one, but this kind of fluid governance. But the question
yeah,
is,
uh,
what alternative are you offering, right? You've stated the problems.
well, this is the thing. I mean, this is why, to be honest, ethics and stuff is not my favorite topic. It's ironic that we're discussing it though. But I would say the first thing is first is find a consistent a system from which you derive your values. You know, so I think that would be the helpful place to start.
Okay, what would this consistent system be?
You're gonna make me say it. Okay. To be honest, for me, the answer is obvious. I believe that, uh, and this is not a consequence of me needing some consistent basis, but I believe Islam happens to be true, and it happens to provide a consistent sort of moral system for us to follow, a moral code, and therefore that doesn't seem to be an issue with me. If I have a disagreement with another Muslim as to what is considered as moral, I would say, actually, let's go back to the Quran. Let's go back to what the Prophet Muhammad said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, and then look at what that says, and then we can decide. And very often, more often than not, people can sort of come to a conclusion and say, actually, yeah, you're right, or I'm right, and that's it. That's sorted. And I found this to be very practical, actually, in terms of, I don't know if you would consider um, companies and families as mini government. But if you want to take that model, then it's a very, very efficient way of dealing with family disputes, for example. One person says that they're right and the other person says that they're right. And what happens is somebody who knows Islamic law would come and arbitrate between them. and they would both accept it because they both think that Islam is true, or they both believe that Islam is true.
Okay, well, I'm not
So,
gonna try to disprove Islam as a good form of governance, but I just want to ask this
sure.
though, like, it wouldn't work if not everyone is a Muslim, right? If you're going to, but well, there are, like, I understand that there are safe spaces, I guess, for like Catholics or Christians or already
Hmm.
professed atheists in Muslim countries, right?
Hmm.
They would respect you for that. But
Hmm.
well, what if someone says just, "I'm not a Muslim," so how is that relevant to me? You know, how would you answer that?
So, do you say, um, in the West we live in a liberal democracy? Would you say that's correct?
Yeah.
Is everyone a liberal under liberal democracy?
Well, no.
Also, what's the problem?
Yeah, but the thing is though, what you're doing though is that you're proposing for them to change from a liberal democracy to this form of government, right? So
Am I?
you're the one that has to convince them. So, but in terms for a postmodernist, well, what you gotta do is just, well, overpower them. That's all. That's all you gotta do to win. Like,
I mean, if I was a postmodernist, there would be no point in me doing that because I don't really believe in those values. I just want power, right?
yeah, yeah,
But I'm not trying to say that the West should become an Islamic state. Let me just clarify. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that for me, this is a system that seems to work because it has a reference point. Just to frame our discussion, by the way, we're not talking about which system is better and which one's worse, although that is a different conversation. The heart of what I'm trying to explain is values that are consistent and they don't create sort of political conflict because they're consistent. And that's because Islam has a consistent reference point. So, I think I don't really feel that the need to convince a liberal that he should live under an Islamic state. Um, no more than a liberal asked me if I'm happy with living under a liberal state. You know, they didn't ask me, you're Muslim, how do you feel about liberalism? Are you okay with it? No, they didn't ask me that. They didn't ask me, when they decided what counts as extremism and what beliefs don't count as extremism, and to be able to take away people's children under the Prevent Act for having certain beliefs. They didn't ask me which beliefs my children are allowed to have and not allowed to have. So this kind of, oh yeah, freedom of thought and freedom of belief thing, it's kind of it's kind of not as true as people think it is. In fact, in the USA, which is supposed to be very free, and everyone's a free and American, yeah. I think up until the 1960s, they were lobotomizing communists. They were saying if you had any communist or socialist leanings, then there's something wrong with you in the brain. So we need to stick a metal rod up your nose and damage the frontal cortex of your brain, the frontal lobe of your brain, excuse me, because you have a problem in terms of your judgment and your calculations. So, this whole thing, there's no such thing really of this complete freedom of ideas and complete freedom of belief. Otherwise, why is there censorship? Why is there hate speech? Why is there extremism? Why is there the Prevent Act? Why did Shamima Begum get her citizenship revoked from the UK?
mm-hmm. Well, we can talk about that. It's gonna be a long topic, but I would want to dive into the how you would view the an Islamic state right now, and what would you
Mm-hmm.
also be your take on it. Like, for example, I talked to a Muslim, and well, you would believe also they would believe also in Sharia law, and that includes stoning and
Mm-hmm.
lashing and stuff like that. But I would understand the
Mm-hmm.
reasons for it. I already do. But what would be your understanding of it?
About that, the corporal punishment, capital punishment sort of thing.
Yeah.
What's the reason behind it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, do you not believe in punishment, as in correcting someone's behavior? If a child is naughty, you put them in the naughty corner, or you ground them, or you don't give them sweets and chocolates. Do you not believe that punishment is something that can correct behavior?
Hmm. Well, I'm not judging, right? Like,
So,
I am pro death penalty here in the Philippines, but the thing is, though, when you look at, let's say, stoning, some say
mhm,
it's barbaric, but we've done it before, and
mhm.
but what would be your take on that? Like, why does society still have that culture? Well, if a liberal Christian, would ask, like, oh, it's barbaric, but like people used to hang people normally. It's not.
Yeah, I think that to me that is neither here nor there in terms of barbaric, because some people would say that, I don't know, the UFC is barbaric, but UFC fighters who do mixed martial arts, yeah, that view is inconsequential to them. They continue to be, UFC fighters. So, or some people will say, that's this is a bit too rough, or that's a bit too rough, and it's to do with personal subjective opinion as to what counts as barbaric and what doesn't. So that in itself doesn't seem to be a good argument for me to say, oh, isn't that a bit mean, or isn't that a bit hard, or isn't that a bit barbaric? Well, some people might think prison is barbaric. You lock someone up, they don't see their family, etc., etc. Your belt is taken off you, so you can't commit suicide. Why would you want to commit suicide? So now I'm not saying prison is worse or stoning is better. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that, yeah, cruelty punishment is not supposed to be nice and soft and gentle. Cruelty is a measure that is taken to punish people. How much that measure should be is something that people differ on. Now, what you need to understand from the perspective of um, an Islamic system, people that live under an Islamic system, they have a different worldview, or they would have a different worldview to the sort of liberal democracy where values are kind of, you can just cherry pick. Oh, on this issue I'm pro-life, and on this issue I'm pro-choice, and then on this issue I'm, death penalty, and on this issue I'm pro-prison, even though they're contradicting each other left, right, and center. And you can say that these are all my values. It doesn't work that way in an Islamic society. And in an Islamic society, the state, the individual, the society, the community, these are all different spheres that have a job to do, um, connected to your purpose in life, which is to, be uh, in the service of God, or to serve God.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Well,
So it's a completely alien concept, I think.
yeah, yeah. So, but the thing though, right? Like, in terms of apostasy laws, for example, if
Mm.
I were to, let's say, be in a Islamic State and just simply declare that I am gonna leave Islam, but I'm not going to say publicize it or ridicule Islam publicly. I'm just gonna leave
Hmm.
Islam and be a
Hmm.
Christian.
Yeah.
What would there would be no consequences actually there, right? There would be no death penalty whatsoever.
How how can there be consequences if you don't publicize it?
Yeah,
Who would know?
yeah. Okay. Yeah, but I guess then that if you were to change your views, to be open about it, that on why you left Islam, maybe start a YouTube channel in, let's say, Pakistan, and
Hmm.
promote Christianity, but you're not gonna ridicule Islam. You're just explaining as to why you left. You know,
Hmm.
what would there would be in that case though? There would be consequences.
Sure, of course there would. In the same way that in our free Western society, if I started a YouTube channel to say why you should join ISIS, of course there'll be consequences. If I started a YouTube channel to say why, and it's not even join ISIS. If I say, you know, the Islamic system is better than this one, and we should replace it, and we should work to replace it, of course there'll be consequences. You were sent to Guantanamo Bay being tasered with, cattle prod. So the consequences of expressing certain beliefs that are a threat to the system is not unique to the Islamic system. All
Awesome.
systems are self-preserving.
Wow, that's a good analogy, man. Like, yeah, for real. I
Yeah.
really, it's awesome. Like, when even in my country, in comparison to that, like I would say, in terms of communist ideologies,
Mhm.
we there are red taggings happening, and if you're professed and a New People's Army, you're like, or you're a communist, well, you're gonna
Mhm.
suffer consequences for that. And I never put it that way. And you're right.
Yeah,
That's a good
absolutely.
analogy.
But that's with any system, any state. Through historically, there's always a limit to what beliefs you can and can't profess.
Awesome. Okay. Cool. Thank you for that. That opened my mind.
All right.
Okay. Okay.
No,
I'm
you're
gonna
welcome.
actually change my position on that. Okay. So one last question.
Oh,
We
good.
we've almost ended an
Yeah,
hour. Like I wanna what are
sure.
your closing statements? I guess in terms of how liberals view Islamic states, and they're barbaric. They're so bad. They stone they lash women who commit adultery. What would be your 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 message to them?
My message would be that, um, you know, um, when it comes to, let's say, for example, women, it's kind of like, yeah, okay, people. It's not just women, by the way, that get lashed or stoned. Men do as well. And if you think that's barbaric, well, that's fine. But you don't have consistent measures and a consistent reference system to even describe your own values. You can't even decide whether life is more important, or choice is more important when it comes to abortion. You change your laws every few decades. You have people uprising, whether they're feminists or BLM or whatever you want to call it, against what the current things are. There's no point pretending that everybody's happy and everybody's on board and agreeing. So that's a complete illusion. And to top it off, women, if you compare them, and I'm not even Islamic countries, women from Muslim countries, there is a lower rate of things like anorexia, which is tied to women's perception of body image. I think the vast majority of people who suffer from anorexia nervosa are women, and that's connected to their body image. So what we don't do or what the Muslim world or the Islamic world wouldn't do is make women's appearance and their attractiveness a public measure of their worth, to the degree that they're starving themselves and making themselves unwell. That's something that the Islamic world does not do to women.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and but in terms of, I guess, feminism, there it's all just subjectivity. I guess what you're saying is,
It's
if
all of it, all of it, all of it,
yeah,
all of it. So, I think, I hope you'll have me again on the podcast. But to be honest, ethics and all of this stuff is not really my favorite topic, because
yeah,
it's all kind of, to me, it feels like a waste of time. Like it's just ice cream, and it's vanilla versus chocolate for me.
yeah. But
It's like,
I
okay,
guess, what would you like to talk about next time? Yeah.
I think when we talked about uncovering the basis of your morality, about what reality is, and then we can discuss what to do about it, because the ontology is to do with what is, and
Mm-hmm.
ethics is to do with what should we do about it. So we've actually started to decide what to do about reality before even discussing what reality is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what I would say to tongue-in-cheek remark, I think I made, but the serious thing that I would say to liberals in the Western world who say that these laws are barbaric is that, um, let's come to a common criteria. Let's find a consistent criteria, and then we can talk about who's barbaric or who's not. Otherwise, this whole discussion is chocolate ice cream versus vanilla ice cream, and it's just subjective taste and preference.
Okay. Well, I would love to have you on another episode, man. But thank you so much for this discussion. It was something that
Absolutely,
I
man.
think that a lot of people needed to hear. And
Yeah. I hope I don't get in trouble.
yeah. Well, I get in trouble a lot.
If I well,
It's okay.
if I get arrested, I'm calling you.
It's okay. Okay. Bye, man. Thank you so much for your time.
All right.
So that's the end of it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. This is your host, Elmo Ador Jr. And thank you for listening in. And please subscribe. Please follow us on Facebook. Please follow this. Please. Thanks.
Gearheads know that some projects need so many parts, it feels like you need a whole storage unit just to store them. That's what eBay Motors' 122 million parts are for. Think of it as your virtual parts garage. They've always got the right fitment at the right prices. Use the eBay Motors app or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.
Holidays are here, and so is fashionable fitness. Gift yourself a Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3 5G, a phone that folds in half to literally stand on its own. Pair it with the Galaxy Watch 4 for ultimate wellness and wow factor. Check health stats, flex personal records. Over 90 activities can be tracked, like biking, swimming, golfing, and more. Invest in yourself with tech made to crush goals. Holidays open up with Galaxy. Shop it all at Samsung.com. 5G connection and availability may vary. Check with carrier. Products sold separately.